This video is brought to you by CoolStuffInc.com and GatheringMagic.com, your place to explore the game.
Oh, hello. My name is Devon Armstrong, and this is my Ulasht the Hate Seed deck. Ulasht the Hate Seed is my general. He's a 2 red and a green for a 0/0 legendary creature Hydra. But I know what you're thinking, and yes, he does have some additional things that he does. So he comes into play for a with a +1/+1 counter for each other red creature I control and for each other green creature I control. So if I control both a red and green creature, he gets +2/+2. Also, I can remove one of these counters for 1 colorless mana to either deal a damage to target creature, so he's a kill spell, or I can put a 1/1 green Sapperling Creature token into play, which increases my token army, which is pretty cool. So, let's get into the deck tech. So I have 9 full art Zendikar Forests, 3 full art Mountains, a foil Khalni Garden, which is nice because it gives me a 0/1 green plant for free, which boosts up Ulasht pretty quickly. And I got Reef the Vastwood, comes into play tapped, but puts a +1/+1 counter on each other green creature that enter the battlefield this turn, which includes Ulasht. So I can pump up Ulasht, or I can pump up all the tokens that I will be putting into play, any of that. And it's not right when I cast it, so I can do it at any point during my turn, which is pretty nice. I run 2 of the cycling lands for late game use, so I have Tranquil Thicket and Forgotten Cave. I have my shock land in the form of Stomping Ground. I've got myself a fast land in Copperline Gorge, a check land in Rootbound Crag. I've got a white bordered Karplusan Forest, which is a pain land, a storage land in the form of Fungal Reaches, scry land in Temple of Abandon, which is great, gotta have that card manipulation. Rugged Highlands gives me a life, which is okay. And Raging Ravine gives me a dude. Specifically, a 3/3 red and green elemental dude that gets a +1/+1 counter every time it attacks, which is kind of cool. And since it's red and green, every time I activate it, I can then cast Ulasht and get 2 counters off of it, which is kind of cool. Gruul Turf. Taps for Gruul, pretty great. Wooded Foothills is my fetch land. I only have the 1. And then I've got a couple of filter lands. I've got Mossfire Valley, which is basically the Gruul Signet on a land, and Opal Palace, a cool little product out of I believe this is the Commander 13 set. And so every time I use it for its filter ability, I can put a +1/+1 counter on Ulasht, which is kind of nice. And then I have Scards the Rage Pits and Kessig Wolf Run to give a creature a boost and some trample, which is always useful. And Rogue's Passage to make that creature unblockable, if need be. Tectonic Edge gives me that land hate, such as an opponent's Rogue's Passage, or obviously their Maze of Ith would be the larger issue, so that's pretty useful. And speaking of Maze of Ith, I don't have my own, so I've got the poor man's version in Mystifying Maze. Wirewood Lodge and City of Shadows, as well as the Gruul Turf, come together as part of a combo piece I'll address in a minute. Wirewood Lodge, I can tap to add a colorless or green tap to untap target elf. I'll explain a little bit more of its use later. And City of Shadows is kind of a cool sack land. I sacrifice one of my creatures, but I remove it from the game instead of placing it in my graveyard. So I do it with one of my tokens, or if somebody's about to board Wrath anyway, I can do it in response, so I can at least get the counter. And then I can tap this to add X colorless mana to my mana pool, where X is the number of counters on City of Shadows. Cool little thing from the dark. Dryad Arbor is the only real man land. It's a 1/1 green forest dryad, also taps for green mana. It isn't a spell, so it can't be countered, but it doesn't have haste. However, it does boost up Ulasht, which is pretty awesome. It does, however, fall victim to board wraths, so keep that in mind. Then I have a Wood Elves, searches for a forest, or usually my shock land. And then this is the creature that combos with these two guys here. This is Argothian Elder. I tap it to untap 2 target lands. So what I do is you tap the Wirewood Lodge you can use the... Actually, you don't need to tap the Wirewood Lodge initially. You tapped 2 lands for 4 mana, and then you can... one of which would be City of Shadows, or you can use Gruul Turf for this as well. City of Shadows would need at least 3 counters in order to pull this off. And you would also need to have in play Gemstone Array, which I will get to later. It just allows you to filter your colorless mana into colored. So then you can then tap the Argothian Elder, untap the City of Shadows and the Wirewood Lodge, then use the filtered mana that you get from the Gemstone Array through the City of Shadows to pay the green mana to untap the Wirewood Elf using the Argothian Elder using the Wirewood Lodge, and Rinse, Wash, Repeat to get infinite mana. Infinite colorless, of course, but with the Gemstone Array you can then filter that out. So that's kind of cool. Yavimaya Elder searches for 2 lands, also allows me to draw a card, which is great. Oracle of Mul Daya, best man search in the game, gives me an extra land drop, and top of the deck manipulation is always useful. Kodama's Reach, search for 2 lands, 1 to play, 1 to hand. For Viridian Joiner, and then Umbral Mantle. This is a classic combo piece. I actually won with this once. So what you can do is equip the Umbral Mantle to the Viridian Joiner. Viridian Joiner says tap to add an amount of green to your mana pool for equal to its power. So it's 1 power initially. And then Umbral Mantle says 3 untap. This creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. So you tap the Viridian Joiner for 1 green mana, and you have 2 mana in your mana pool that are available. So you tap those, and then you have the green mana to then pay the Umbral Mantle's cost to untap the Viridian Joiner. Suddenly it's a 3/4. You tap to add 3 green to your mana pool, use that 3 green to untap. Suddenly it's a 5/6. You tap it to then add 5 green mana to your mana pool, then use the 3 to untap to make it 7, and etc, 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 and you get infinite green mana, as well as an infinite +1 size creature, which is kind of cool. As for other mana rocks, I've got the Everclassic Soul Ring, Gruul Signet, Ashnod's Altar, nice sack outlet, gives me some 2 colorless mana, which I can then put into the Gemstone Array I was just talking about, which says 2 colorless, put a charge counter on it, remove a charge counter out of it, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Great piece, combos in a lot of ways, also just a solid, useful artifact to have in play. I really like this. And then there's this guy. This is Mana Echoes. So this is kind of complicated. So whenever a creature comes into play, you may add 1 colorless to your mana pool for each creature you control that shares a creature type with it. So say you have Ulasht out, and then you pay the 1 colorless mana to put a 1/1 green sapling creature token in play. It will read the 1/1 green sapling creature and add 1 mana to your mana pool. You can then use that 1 mana to put another token into play. Suddenly it reads 2 saplings and gives you 2 mana. And then if you have a way of putting counters back onto Ulasht, then you can keep recycling that through for infinite creatures and infinite colorless mana, which is really cool. Relic of Progenitus, Graveyard Hate, and draws me a card. Slate of Ancestry. Sometimes you just really need to get that card draw going, and with a lot of tokens in play, you can draw a lot of cards. I need to get a Reliquary Tower in this deck. I don't have a spare one at the moment, but that will be my next addition, simply because I have the Slate of Ancestry. More card draw in Staff of Nin gives me an extra draw in my upkeep, and I deal 1 damage to our creature or player. Not always relevant, but sometimes useful. And then I have Skull Clamp, needed in every single sapling deck or token deck ever. Quick creature gets +1/-1. Whenever it's put into a graveyard, draw 2 cards. This basically reads, pay 1 mana, draw 2 cards. That's what it reads, and it's pretty great. Harmonize, green card draw from Planar Chaos. Skull Mulcher from Alara Reborn, I believe, with Devour 1. Oh no, this is from Alara, regular Alara, excuse me. When it comes in, so what this says is when it comes into play, you may sacrifice any number of creatures. This creature comes into play with that many +1/+1 counters on it. And then when it comes into play, I draw a card for each creature it devoured. Great when I have a bunch of saplings in play. And I also have Fecundity for more card draw. Whenever creatures put into a creature graveyard from play, that creature's controller may draw a card. And then I have some yard search or library search in Signal the Clans. Search your library for 3 creature cards and reveal them. And if you reveal them with different names, which you will because it's EDH, choose one of them at random, put it into your hand, shuffle the rest into your library. Be very careful about the ones you choose. Try and get ones with similar effects so that you get the same effect you need. Pattern of Rebirth. Enchant creature. Once put in graveyard from play, that creature controller may search his library for a creature card, put that card into play. If that player does, he or she shuffles his library. So you put this on a token. You sacrifice a token in any of a number of ways. Search your library for Crater Hoof Behemoth and win the game. Basically is what that says. Genesis Hydra. Nice foil promo version. When you cast it, reveal the top X cards of your library. You may put a non-land permanent card with converted mana cost X or less from among them on the battlefield. Then shuffle the rest in your library. And then enters the battlefield at X +1/+1 counters on it. Just another way of searching the library. And of course we have Chord of Calling. Thank you M15 for printing a cheaper version. Primal Command has several modes. So I can either gain 7, target player gains 7 life, put target non-creature permanent on top of his or her on top of its owner's library. Target player shuffles his or her graveyard into his or her library, or search your library for a creature card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle your library. So I can either gain life, search for a card, or tuck somebody else's card. This was more powerful back before the tuck change rule, but still rather useful. At the very least, it's a tempo play, which is pretty nice. So, I like it. Apocalypse Hydra is basically another version of Ulasht. Comes into play with X +1/+1 counters on it. If X is 5 or more, it comes into play with double that. And I can pay 1 in a red to remove a counter from it to deal 1 damage target creature or player, which is pretty great. This is a great card to sink my infinite mana into. Ground Assault is another kill spell. Deals damage to target creature equal to the number of lands you control. Massive Raid deals damage to target creature or player equal to the number of creatures you control. This is pretty great if you're making infinite tokens and your opponent makes it so that you can't attack. Well, they're not going to be expecting the Massive Raid. Also, again, it's a kill spell. Artifact Mutation, in here more to destroy the artifact than for the incidental sapling creation, but it's rather nice. Red, green, destroy target artifact, can't be regenerated. Put X 1/1 green sapling creature tokens into play equal to that artifact's CMC. Corrosion Grip, split second naturalize. Acidic Slime, everyone's favorite green card. Basically destroys everything when you include the Death Touch, so that's pretty cool. Terrastodon, when it enters battlefield, destroy up to 3 target non-creature permanents. For each permanent put in the graveyard this way, its controller puts a 3/3 green elephant creature token onto the battlefield. Great thing to do to your opponent's planeswalkers that are about to go, and saves the rest of the board. And you don't really care if they have a 3/3 elephant because they're not really going to be able to do much with it generally. There's also where I run Beast Within, way to stop those planeswalker shenanigans, as well as other incidental destruction. And I also run Chaos Warp. Again, less powerful now that the tuck rule isn't a thing, but you can still tuck a lot of other rather important things into their libraries and generally ruin your opponent's day. So Chaos Warp is really good. Desert Twister, destroy target permanent. And then I got a couple of Wrath effects. I've got Blasphemous Act, nice foil one. Costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield. Does 13 damage to each creature. This seems like a nombo with my deck, but sometimes I'm having issues getting the token theme going. But other players are doing rather well with their creature shenanigans, and you just really need to get that off. And it does cost less for each creature on the battlefield, so I like having it as a backup. And again, we have Nevin Rawl's Disc. Destroys basically everything, which is pretty cool. Comes into play tapped, but oh well. Eternal Witness gets a much-needed card back from my graveyard. Then I've got some stuff that gives some effects to my creatures. So I have Hammer Perforos, which gives all of my creatures haste. And I can pay 2 and a red to tap and sacrifice a land to put a 3/3 colorless golem into play. Not always the smartest decision, but sometimes you just need that one last creature to get things through. It's colorless though, so it doesn't activate. It doesn't add to Ulasht, unfortunately. Archetype of Aggression also gives my creatures haste. Or, excuse me, not haste, it gives them trample, which is pretty useful. Archetype of Endurance gives them hexproof, which is rather nice. And makes my opponents can't have hexproof, which is also useful. Chroma's Memorial. Just because I have 1/1s doesn't mean I don't like having 1/1 Chromas. So, gives them flying, first strike, vigilance, trample, haste, and protection from black and from red, which is rather helpful. Ivy Lane Denizen is the last piece, the combo piece I need for Mana Echoes and Ulasht. So, if you remember with the Mana Echoes, every time a creature comes into play, it counts how many creatures share a creature type with it and adds that much colorless mana to your mana pool. What this says is every time a green creature comes into play, you may put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. So what this does is put the +1/+1 counter back on Ulasht, which you can then take off with the Mana Echoes mana to then create more 1/1 tokens, which then you put the counter back on with the Ivy Lane Denizen. So that's a rather cool little combo I have. Board Tusk Liege pumps up my red and green guys by +1/+1. Vitalizing Wind gives everything +7/+7, which is kind of cool. And it's instant speed, which is rather interesting. Verdaloth the Ancient is a tree folk. 4/7 for 6. All of the tree folk and all saplings get +1/+1. And when it comes into play, if I paid the kicker cost, you put X 1/1 green sapling creature tokens into play, which is kind of cool. So, adding to the sapling theme, we have Psychotrope Thallid. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a Spore counter on it. Remove 3 Spore counters to put a 1/1 green sapling creature token into play, and I can sacrifice a sapling to draw a card, which is really helpful. Michaeloth. Similar to the other, to the Spawn Broker, except instead of drawing cards, it has Devour 2, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you put a 1/1 green sapling creature token into play for each +1/+1 counter on it, Michaeloth, which means that I double the amount of tokens I previously had, which is awesome. Night Swale is my other graveyard hate. It's an enchantment. It says pay 1 green, remove 2 creatures in your graveyard from the game to put a sapling creature and 1/1 green sapling creature token into play. I'll move this forward a bit. Sprout Swarm, really well-known piece for green token decks. It's a 2-mana instant with buyback and convoke. So you put a 1/1 green sapling creature token into play. You can use the convoke cost to pay down the cost of your buyback, which is 3 colorless mana, and the cost of the actual spell. So that's 5 mana total to make your 1/1 green sapling creature token. And then, if you have any way of doubling the amount of creatures you control, that becomes 2, and then you can use this to actually go infinite thanks to the convoke. So, I've done that before too. Wormcoil Engine, nice little value card. Death Touch Lifelink 6/6 Worm. When it dies, put a 3/3 Death Touch Worm and a 3/3 Lifelink Worm onto the battlefield. I don't have any way of going crazy with this. I don't have a lot of graveyard recursion except for the Eternal Witness. But it is a nice little value card. Gives me a little bit of incidental blockers and some incidental life gain, which is nice. So that's why I like it. Ant Queen. 1 and a green to put a 1/1 green insect creature token onto the battlefield. Nice mana sink. Hydra Broodmaster. Another mana sink. Another Hydra, too, which is kind of cool. So, 6 mana for a 7/7. When it becomes monstrous, you put XXX green Hydra creature tokens onto the battlefield. And then I have Spawn Writhe and his big brother Super Spawn Writhe, otherwise known as Giant Adaphage. These guys are cool because they double each other each turn. So whenever Spawn Writhe or Giant Adaphage deal damage to a player, they put copies into play that are copies of themselves. And so if you do damage with both of them next time, then you put 2 more in. And then if you do damage with each of those, you put more in. So it goes up exponentially, which is rather awesome. Spawn Writhe is a 2/2, Giant Adaphage is a 7/7. Rampaging Baloths has Landfall. Put a 4/4 green beast creature token on the battlefield every time a land enters the battlefield. And speaking of landfall, we have Avenger of Zendikar. 5/5 for 7. When it enters the battlefield, put a 0/1 green plant creature token on the battlefield for each land you control. Usually 7. Sometimes a little less, but usually 7. At around there. And landfall, whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a +1/+1 counter on each plant creature you control. This also includes the 0/1 I get with the Khalni Garden, by the way, which is kind of cool. And then, with all these tokens, you gotta have ways of doubling the tokens. So I have Parallel Lives and Doubling Season. Nice foil one from Modern Masters. And then my last little bits of cards here are my win conditions. So I have Mage Slayer, which was a win con. Like I said, I won with Viridian Joiner once, so I attacked with my infinite Viridian Joiner with the Mage Slayer attached. And what the Mage Slayer does is it deals damage equal to its power to defending player when it attacks, before they have any chance to respond. So if they don't have a Corrosion Grip, they take half of infinite immediately, which was really cool. And of course, Perforos. Gotta have this in a token deck with red. Every time a creature enters the battlefield, each opponent, each one, takes 2 damage. And I can pay 2 in a red to give it my creatures an expensive fire breathing. But it's really the 2 damage when they come into play, which is most important. And of course, the big daddy of them all, Craterhoof Behemoth. 5/5 haste for 8. When it enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain trample and +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. All those infinite tokens you've been making, they're now +infinite. And there's no way your opponents can deal. Garruk Primal Hunter. The best of the mono green Garruks, I think. Because he gives you a token and he can also draw you cards, which is pretty nice. And his ultimate gives you a 6/6 worm for each land you control, which is rather powerful. And lastly, we have Xenagos, Xenawalker. Gives me +1 is add X mana in any combination of red or green to your mana pool, where X is the number of creatures you control. Its 0 cost is to make a 2/2 red and green satyr, and a -6 is exile the top 7 cards of your library and put any number of creature cards and or land cards from among them onto the battlefield. And that's my deck. Thank you for watching CMDR Decks. Don't forget to subscribe and favorite.